My son handed me an invoice for living in my own house. What he did not know was that I had been quietly preparing for that moment for almost 3 years. My name is Walter Haines. I am 64 years old. I spent 31 years building a commercial landscaping business from a single truck and a push mower to a company with 42 employees and contracts across 4 counties in central Ohio. I tell you that not to brag. I tell you that so you understand exactly what was at stake when my son decided I was no longer useful to him. My son's name is Derek. He is 38 years old. He has his mother's green eyes and my jawline. And somewhere along the way, he stopped being the boy who used to fall asleep in the truck cab waiting for me to finish a job and became someone I genuinely did not recognize. His mother, my wife Patricia, passed away 11 years ago from a brain aneurysm. She was 51. She was gardening in the backyard on a Tuesday morning and she just sat down in the dirt, and that was it. I found her when I came home for lunch. Derek was 27 at the time. He took it hard. We both did. For a few years after that, we were close in the way that loss sometimes pulls people together. He would come by the house on Sundays. We would watch football and eat sandwiches and not talk about her. But we both knew that was why we were there. Then he met my daughter-in-law. Her name is Brittany. She came from money, or at least she grew up believing she did, which in my experience is often worse. Her father had been a regional sales director for a pharmaceutical company, and they had lived well. But by the time Derek and Brittany married, her parents were quietly maxed out on 3 credit cards and refinancing their house for the 4th time. None of that was Brittany's fault, of course. But she had the tastes without the income to support them. And Derek, who had always wanted to impress people, saw her as the life he was supposed to have. Within 2 years of their wedding, Derek had moved into a house in a neighborhood where the HOA fees alone were more than my first mortgage payment. He had a lease on a car I could not have afforded at his age. He had memberships he never used and a wine refrigerator in the kitchen that I once heard him describe to a neighbor as a collection. I did not say anything. He was my son. Fathers watch their children make choices they would not make themselves. And you either say something and damage the relationship, or you stay quiet and stay close enough to help when things go sideways. I chose to stay close. What I did not anticipate was how quickly staying close would become expected, and then demanded, and then resented when I could not keep up. It started small, the way these things always do. A loan here, a favor there. Derek needed a down payment for the house. I gave it to him as a gift, not a loan, because Patricia always said that lending money to family poisons the well. $40,000. He thanked me. Brittany did not come to the closing, which I noticed but did not mention. Then there was the kitchen renovation. Then there was the vacation to Portugal that Derek mentioned offhand was getting expensive. Then there was Oliver. My grandson was born 4 years after Derek and Brittany married. He was the most serious baby I had ever seen. He looked at everything like he was trying to memorize it. When he was 2, he used to walk around the yard holding my hand and pointing at every plant and waiting for me to tell him what it was. He remembered everything I told him. Oak, redbud, hostas, wild ginger. He would say the names back to me the following week like he was checking his own memory against mine. I loved that boy more than I knew it was possible to love anything after Patricia died. By the time Oliver was 3, I was watching him 4 days a week. Not because I had been asked formally. It had just accumulated, one favor building on the next, until it was simply the arrangement. Brittany worked part-time at a boutique in a shopping center near their house, and Derek worked in commercial real estate, and daycare was expensive, they said. I did not mind. I would have watched Oliver 7 days a week if they had asked me to, but I noticed that neither of them thanked me for it. Not once. In 4 years, did either of them say, "Dad, we appreciate what you do." What they said, when they said anything at all, was that I should try to get him to nap earlier or not give him so much sugar or please don't take him to the park in that old truck. It looks terrible. I kept quiet. The invoice arrived on a Thursday evening in March. I had come by to drop Oliver off after a full day. He had a scratch on his knee from the driveway, and I had cleaned it and put a bandage on it with a cartoon frog on it because that was the kind he liked. I handed him to Brittany at the door, and she looked at the bandage and frowned and said what happened. And I explained, and she said, You really need to watch him more carefully," and turned back inside. I stood on the porch for a moment. Derek came to the door. He had his work jacket still on. He looked tired and irritated, which was more or less his permanent expression in those years. He said he needed to talk to me. I came inside. Oliver had already gone to his room. Derek sat down at the kitchen table and pushed a piece of paper across it toward me. It was printed on Derek's real estate letterhead. It was an itemized list. Rent, it said at the top. Fair market value assessment for use of residential support services. There were line items. Childcare reimbursement offset. It read, crediting back what he considered my contribution against what he claimed I owed him for utilizing the family home address for business mail and storage of equipment on the residential property. I had one push spreader and a bag of fertilizer in his garage. He had asked me to store it there 6 months earlier. The bottom line showed that after his so-called offsets, I owed him $2,300 per month, retroactive to the previous January. I looked at the paper for a long time. Then I looked at my son. He was not looking at me. He was looking at the table. "Brittany and I have been talking," he said. "We feel like the current arrangement isn't really sustainable." I asked him what arrangement he meant. "The financial dynamic," he said. "Dad, honestly, the money you've given me over the years, you've gotten a lot of value out of this family too. The holidays, having somewhere to come, being part of Oliver's life." He paused. "Brittany's father has been helping us out, but he can't keep doing that forever. And we just think it's time for things to be more equitable." I want to tell you that I said something powerful in that moment. Something that shut the conversation down. Something Patricia would have been proud of. But I did not. I picked up the paper, folded it in half, put it in my jacket pocket, and told my son I would think about it. He looked relieved, which was the wrong thing to look. I said goodbye. I walked past the hallway to Oliver's room and I stopped and I said through the door that I would see him soon, and he called back, "Bye, Grandpa," and I walked out to my truck. I sat in the driveway for several minutes. I did not cry. I had done my crying. All of it, in the years after Patricia died. And there was not much left. What I felt instead was a kind of cold clarity, like the moment before a hard frost when the air goes completely still. I drove home. I went to my office, which is a small room off the kitchen that Patricia used to use for her sewing. I opened the bottom drawer of the desk and I took out a folder that had been sitting there for 14 months. I had started the folder the previous January, the morning after Derek had called me and told me, in the middle of a conversation about something else entirely, that I should think about what you're going to do with the business. Because honestly, Dad, it's a young man's game, and you're not getting any sharper. He had said it casually, the way you might mention the weather. I had hung up the phone and sat very still for a while, and then I had opened that drawer and started a folder. In the folder was a copy of the original deed to my business. A copy of every financial gift I had given Derek since Patricia died, which I had reconstructed from bank records. A letter I had written to my attorney 4 months earlier asking him to update my will and my power of attorney, and a copy of a conversation I had with a financial advisor in November about restructuring my business assets. The total of gifts I had given Derek since Patricia's death came to $214,000. The business, which I had never transferred any ownership interest in, was appraised at just under $1.2 million. I was the sole owner. Derek had once, at a family dinner, referred to it as basically our retirement plan, and I had smiled and said nothing. I called my attorney the next morning and told him I was ready to move forward. Over the next 6 weeks, I did several things quietly. I removed Derek and Brittany as beneficiaries from my estate and replaced them with a trust structured for Oliver's education and welfare, managed by my attorney as trustee until Oliver turned 25. I filed the paperwork to begin a formal sale process for the landscaping business. To my operations manager, a man named Gary, who had worked for me for 19 years and had been asking to buy me out for 3 of them. I had always hesitated out of habit. I stopped hesitating. I also called my sister in Tucson. Her name is Ruth. She is 68 and she has a spare room in a house with a garden she can barely keep up with, and she had been asking me for years to come spend some time with her. I booked a one-way flight. I told Gary I would sign the final sale documents at closing. and that closing was scheduled for 6 weeks out. I did not stop watching Oliver during those weeks. I watched him 4 days a week, as I always had. I took him to the park in my old truck, which I never apologized for. I taught him the names of 4 new plants. I bought him a small illustrated field guide to Ohio trees and wrote his name inside the cover. Derek called me twice during that period. Both times he asked about the invoice situation, and both times I told him I was still working through it. He seemed satisfied with that answer, which told me something about how seriously he had started taking me. The week before closing, on a Wednesday afternoon, I picked Oliver up from preschool as usual, and we went to the park, and then to get ice cream, and then back to my house, where he fell asleep on the couch watching a nature documentary about turtles. I sat in the chair across from him and watched him sleep for a while. Then I did something I had been thinking about for weeks. I called my attorney and asked a question I already knew the answer to, because I needed to hear it said clearly. I asked whether, given what I had observed over the past 2 years, the isolation, the controlling behaviors Brittany exhibited toward Oliver, the one incident 4 months earlier when Oliver had come to my house with a bruise on his upper arm, and a story that changed twice when I asked him what had happened, whether there was a path to pursue a formal custody or welfare assessment. My attorney said yes. He said I would need to document everything. I told him I already had. I had written down the bruise incident the evening it happened. I had written the date and what Oliver said and what he changed his story to. I had photographs because I had learned, somewhere in that first year of quiet watching, to take photographs. I had 3 other incidents documented in the same folder. The night before I flew to Tucson, I had dinner with my friend Raymond, who I have known since we were both in our 30s and coaching Little League in the same park district. Raymond is a retired family court judge. We ate at a diner on the east side where they still make pie the right way, and over coffee I laid it all out for him. Not asking for legal advice, just asking what he saw. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Walter, you need to file something." I flew to Tucson the next morning. I was at Ruth's house for 11 days before Derek realized what had happened. He had tried to reach me twice on my cell phone, and I had responded briefly both times saying I was resting and would call soon. On the 12th day, he called 4 times in a row, and then texted in capital letters asking where I was and whether I had lost my mind. I called him back that evening. Ruth was on the back porch with a glass of lemonade, pointedly giving me privacy. Derek spoke for several minutes before I said anything. He covered a great deal of ground. He was worried about me. He thought I might be having some kind of episode. He needed me to understand that the invoice had just been a conversation starter. He mentioned that they had been counting on me for Oliver's schedule, and that this was disruptive and selfish. I let him finish. Then I told him calmly that I was fine. I told him I was in Tucson with Ruth and I was not having an episode. I told him that I had sold the business and that the closing had occurred 2 days earlier and that Gary was now the owner of Haines Landscaping. I told him that I had updated my estate documents and that he should speak with my attorney if he had questions about those changes. And I told him that my attorney would be reaching out to him regarding Oliver, and that I hoped we could handle that part of things without it becoming adversarial. The silence on his end lasted long enough that I checked to make sure the call had not dropped. When he spoke again, his voice was different, smaller. He asked what I meant about Oliver. I told him that I had some concerns I had been documenting for a while. I told him that I was not doing this to hurt him or Brittany. I told him that Oliver was the most important thing in both our lives, and I believed we both knew that, and that I needed to know he was safe and that the situation in that house was stable. Derek said, "You can't do that, Dad. You can't just decide." I told him that I already had. The next 3 months were the hardest I had experienced since Patricia died. There were lawyers and a guardian ad litem and a family services assessment. There were conversations I did not want to have and paperwork I did not want to file, and 2 separate occasions where Derek left messages on my phone that I still have not listened to all the way through. Ruth sat with me through most of it. She brought me coffee and did not tell me it would all be fine, because she did not know that, and she is not the kind of woman who says things she does not know. The assessment came back with findings that I will not repeat in detail here, except to say that they were consistent with what I had documented. The home environment was found to be unstable in specific ways. Brittany entered a voluntary program. Derek, to his credit, did not fight the process once the report came back. He cooperated. I believe some part of him had known for a while, and had not known what to do with what he knew. Oliver came to live with me. Not permanently, not in the way that closes doors. The arrangement was temporary, pending Derek completing a parenting course and family counseling. And I agreed to that willingly because Derek was still my son and Oliver still needed his father. But temporarily, for as long as it took, my grandson was living in my house in central Ohio, with the field guide to Ohio trees on his nightstand, and the frog bandages in the bathroom cabinet, and the old truck in the driveway that he had never once been embarrassed by. The day I went to the courthouse and walked out with the temporary custody order in my hand, I stood on the courthouse steps for a moment. It was late September. The trees along the street were just starting to turn. Oliver was back at Ruth's watching television, because I had flown back to Tucson after the assessment, and I had not been back long. A woman walking past looked at the paper in my hand and must have seen something in my face, because she smiled at me in the way strangers sometimes do when they sense that something significant has just happened to you. I drove back to Ruth's house. Oliver was on the floor with the field guide open in front of him. He had found the page on cottonwood trees and was looking at the photographs very seriously. "Grandpa," he said, without looking up, "it says cottonwoods can live to be 150 years old." I sat down on the floor next to him. "Some of them even longer," I said. He turned the page. I watched his face. There is something people do not tell you about this kind of situation. They talk about the anger, and the money, and the legal process, and what you did, and when you did it. They do not talk much about the part that comes after all of that, when you are sitting on a floor in Tucson with a 6-year-old and a tree book, and the late afternoon light coming through the window at that particular angle that September light gets, and you realize that the reason you moved quietly for 3 years instead of loudly was never really about the money or the invoice or the insult of it. It was about this. It was always about this. Patricia would have known that immediately. She was better at seeing the center of things than I ever was. I tend to circle around the outside of things for a long time before I understand what I am actually looking at. 3 years is a long time to circle. But I got there. Oliver looked up from the book. "Can we find one?" he said. "A cottonwood?" I told him yes. I told him there were several along the bike path by the river and we would go first thing in the morning. He went back to his book. I sat beside him on the floor of Ruth's house in Tucson, in the last warm weeks of a year that had changed everything, and I did not move for a long time. My son called me that night. Not the version of Derek who had left those messages, the one whose voice I did not recognize. This was something closer to the boy who used to sit in the truck cab and wait for me. He did not apologize. Not exactly. Not in the way that would have satisfied a lawyer. But he said that he knew he had made mistakes. He said he missed Oliver. He said he was going to the counseling. I told him that was good. I told him I was glad. "Dad," he said. He stopped. He tried again. "I didn't think you would actually. I know you didn't," I said. Another silence. The kind that doesn't need to be filled. "The business," he said. I thought, "I built that business," I said. "Your mother and I. It was never the retirement plan you described it as. It was 31 years of early mornings and late estimates, and a lot of dirt under our fingernails." I paused. "But I got a fair price for it, and Gary will take good care of it." Derek did not say anything to that. "Get some sleep," I told him. "We'll talk more when I'm back." I hung up and went to check on Oliver, who had fallen asleep with the field guide open on his chest, his fingers still on the page about cottonwoods. I moved the book to the nightstand and turned off the light. "I want to tell you one more thing before I finish. The invoice that Derek slid across the table to me that Thursday evening in March sat in my jacket pocket for 3 days before I unfolded it again. When I did, I read it more carefully than I had at the table. Down in the fine print, in the margins where Derek had apparently drafted some notes to himself that he forgot were visible when he printed it, there were 2 words in small type near the bottom. "Sorry, Dad." He had typed it and then moved it off the document before printing, except he had not moved it far enough. I do not know what he meant by it when he wrote it. I do not know if he meant it the way I read it, as a confession about more than just the invoice. I do not know if he even remembered typing it. But I kept that paper. It is in the folder in the bottom drawer, behind the deed and the financial records and the custody order, in the back where I put the things I am not ready to throw away but am not ready to look at every day either. Some things you keep, some things you let go. The work is in knowing which is which, and most of us spend a lifetime getting it wrong before we finally figure it out. My name is Walter Haines. I am 64 years old. I have a grandson who can identify 11 Ohio tree species from memory, a business I sold to a man who deserved it, a folder in a desk drawer, and a cottonwood tree that I am going to find in the morning. I think that is enough.